The rain poured heavily that evening, drumming against the pavement with a rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of John's heart. He stood alone in front of the grand mansion on Riverside Drive, the same imposing structure that had once been his childhood home, a place filled with memories both beautiful and devastating. The wrought iron gates stood partially open, as if inviting him in, yet also warning him of what lay beyond. Water streamed down his face, mixing with something that might have been tears, though John had learned long ago to hide such vulnerabilities. In his hands, protected beneath his jacket, he held a leather folder containing property papers with fresh ink. His name was written across them in bold, official letters: John Michael Carter, owner. He had bought everything: the mansion, the company buildings, the land. Everything his parents had built over decades of hard work, everything they had promised would never be his, now belonged to him alone. As lightning split the darkening sky, John remembered the words that had shattered his world years ago. "You were never truly ours." But that was a different time, a different John. And standing here now, with the deed to his childhood home in his hands, he understood that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about revenge, they're about reclaiming the worth that others tried to steal from you. Many years earlier, John had been the quiet one in the family, the youngest of 3 sons born to Richard and Margaret Carter, owners of Carter Industries, a mid-size manufacturing company that had been the family's pride for 2 generations. Their home was a sprawling mansion with marble floors, a circular driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges, and enough rooms that John sometimes felt lost in his own house. His brothers, Michael and David, were everything their parents had hoped for. Michael, the eldest, was charismatic and bold, with their father's sharp business mind and commanding presence. He could walk into any room and immediately become its center. David, 2 years younger, was different but equally impressive. Meticulous, detail-oriented, a perfectionist who could spot a flaw in a contract from across the room. Then there was John, 18 years old, thin and quiet, with eyes that seemed to observe more than they revealed. He preferred books to board meetings, thoughtful silence to aggressive negotiation. While his brothers dressed in tailored suits and Italian leather shoes, John wore simple clothes and walked with his head slightly bowed, as though apologizing for taking up space. Every family dinner was a performance where John had no lines. His father would ask Michael about a recent business deal, eyes shining with pride as his eldest son recounted his victories. David would share his latest analysis, and their mother would nod appreciatively, touching his hand with maternal affection. When John spoke, which was rare, the room would grow quiet, but not with the attentive silence his brothers commanded. It was the awkward quiet of people waiting politely for an interruption to end. John made the honor roll again, her mother once mentioned at dinner, almost as an afterthought. "That's nice," his father had replied without looking up from his plate, then turning to Michael. "Now, about the Henderson contract. Tell me how you close that deal. That's the kind of skill that builds empires." John had learned not to expect more. Every compliment his brothers received was followed by silence toward him, as though the family's supply of praise was limited and had been exhausted on the worthier sons. At school events, John would see his parents arrive late and leave early, always with an excuse. They attended every one of Michael's tennis matches and all of David's debate competitions, but when John won the regional mathematics competition, they forgot to come entirely. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, John studied harder, worked more diligently, and never asked for attention. He told himself that one day his efforts would speak for themselves. One day they would see him. He was wrong. John was 23 years old when his world fell apart. He had just graduated from university with honors in business administration, paid for by student loans, since his parents had invested his college fund into more pressing business opportunities. His brothers, of course, had attended Ivy League schools, fully funded, with new cars waiting for them upon graduation. John had taken the bus home, carrying everything he owned in 2 worn suitcases. That Sunday evening, his father called a family meeting in the main office of their home, a wood-paneled room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive oak desk that had belonged to John's grandfather. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of the company's milestones, the first factory opening, a handshake with the mayor, Michael cutting a ribbon at a new facility. There were no photos of John. "I've asked you all here," Richard Carter began, standing behind his desk with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed, "because your mother and I have made an important decision about the future of Carter Industries. Michael, you will assume the role of CEO. Your vision and leadership have proven invaluable. David, you will serve as CFO and head of operations. Your attention to detail and strategic thinking will ensure our continued success." Michael grinned, shaking David's hand. "We'll make you proud, Dad." "I know you will, son. I know you will." John waited, his heart pounding with a hope he tried desperately to suppress. Perhaps he would be given a role too, something smaller, something to start with. He would work his way up. He would prove himself. But his father sat down. The meeting, apparently, concluded. "Father?" John's voice came out smaller than he intended. "What about me?" Richard Carter looked at his youngest son as though genuinely surprised he was still in the room. "What about you?" "What will my role be in the company?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Michael and David exchanged glances, uncomfortable, knowing. His mother, Margaret Carter, stood by the window, her back to the room, saying nothing. "John," his father said slowly, the way one might speak to a child who doesn't understand why they can't have something, "this is a family business. It will stay with family." "I am family," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you?" His mother's voice cut through the room like a blade of ice. She turned to face him, her expression a carefully controlled mixture of pity and something else, something that looked almost like disgust. "I don't understand." "You were never truly ours, John." The words came from his father now, matter of fact, as though commenting on the weather. "Oh, legally, yes, on paper. But in here," he tapped his chest, "you've always been separate, apart." The room tilted. John gripped the edge of a chair to steady himself. "What do you mean?" "We're saying," Michael interjected, his tone almost gentle, almost apologetic, "that this company is for real Carters, and you're just not one of us, little brother." "Not in the ways that matter," David added. John looked at his mother, desperate for her to contradict them, to tell him this was some cruel test, some misunderstanding. But Margaret Carter simply turned back to the window, dismissing him with her silence. "You can't mean this," John's voice cracked. "I'm your son." "Biologically, perhaps, but family is more than biology, John. It's about legacy, about carrying forward a vision. You don't share our vision. You never have." Those words shattered him. He felt his chest tighten, as though someone had wrapped steel bands around his ribs and was slowly squeezing. His eyes burned with tears he absolutely refused to show. Not here. Not in front of them.
"I've worked hard," John managed to say. "My whole life I've tried." "Tried," his mother interrupted, still facing the window. "That's the problem, isn't it? Your brothers don't try, they simply are. They embody what it means to be a Carter. You're something else entirely." "Get out," John said quietly. "What?" His father looked genuinely surprised. "Get out of my life." John's voice was steadier now, fueled by something that felt like grief transforming into steel. "If I'm not your son, if I'm not family, then you're not my parents. This isn't my home." He turned and walked toward the door, his vision blurring with unshed tears. "Where will you go?" his mother asked, her voice completely devoid of concern, merely curious. John stopped, his hand on the doorknob. "Anywhere but here." "You're making a mistake," his father called after him. "You'll come back. You'll realize you need us." John looked back one final time at the family he'd spent 23 years trying to belong to. "No, I finally realize I don't." That night, he packed everything he owned into those same 2 suitcases. As dawn broke, John Michael Carter walked out of the mansion on Riverside Drive, leaving behind the only life he'd ever known. In his pocket, he had $217, a bus ticket to the city, and a phone number for a youth hostel that rented beds by the week. Michael inherited the CEO position, a new Mercedes, and the mansion's East Wing. David inherited the CFO position, a vacation home in the mountains, and enough company stock to secure his future forever. John walked away with 2 suitcases, a broken heart, and a question that would haunt him. If they never saw me as theirs, then who am I? But beneath that question, buried deep where even John couldn't quite see it yet, was something else. Something his parents had accidentally planted with their cruelty. It was small and hard, like a seed made of stone, but it was growing. It was determination. As he stood at the bus stop watching the mansion disappear in the distance, John whispered to himself, a promise, a prayer, a declaration. One day, I'll make something of myself. Not to prove them wrong, not for revenge, but to prove I can, to prove I'm worth something, even if they never saw it. Life outside the mansion wasn't just difficult. It was brutal. The youth hostel was in the worst part of the city, where sirens wailed through the night and the smell of garbage created an atmosphere of despair. John's room was a bunk bed in a shared space with 7 other men. His first job was washing dishes at an all-night diner called Mel's. The pay was minimum wage, the hours were graveyard shift, and the work was endless. His hands, unused to manual labor, blistered and bled. He worked from midnight to 8 in the morning, then took a 3-hour bus ride to the community college where he'd enrolled in business courses. He'd sit in the back of the classroom, exhausted but forcing his eyes to stay open, taking notes in handwriting that grew sloppier as the semester progressed. After classes, he'd return to the hostel, sleep for 4 or 5 hours, and start the cycle again. He was always hungry. The diner gave him 1 meal per shift, usually whatever hadn't sold and would otherwise be thrown away. Cold fries, stale toast, sometimes, if Mel was feeling generous, an actual hamburger. John learned to eat slowly, to make it last, to trick his stomach into feeling fuller than it was. One Sunday, 3 months into this new life, John stood in line at a food bank. He'd resisted for weeks, pride making him skip meals rather than accept charity. But pride doesn't fill an empty stomach. The woman ahead of him had 2 small children clinging to her legs. When one of the cans rolled away, John picked it up and handed it to her youngest child. "Thank you," the boy said, his eyes wide. The mother looked at John and said softly, "It gets better. I don't know when, but it does. My grandmother used to say, the storm doesn't last forever, but the lessons do. I hope that's true." John watched her leave, and something shifted inside him. These people, The line of struggling humans, the overnight workers, the men in the hostel, they were more real than anything he'd experienced in the mansion. His brothers were living in luxury they'd done nothing to earn, and here he was, working himself to exhaustion for scraps. But somehow, paradoxically, he was more alive now than he'd ever been. That night, instead of sleeping, John sat with his notebooks. He'd been keeping track of everything he learned, not just from his classes, but from life itself. How to budget when you have almost nothing. How to identify which expired food is still safe. How to make connections with people who might help you find work. But more importantly, he was learning about business from angles his brothers would never understand. He was learning what it meant to be truly poor, and therefore what people truly needed. While Michael and David spent their days in inherited offices, John was building something more valuable, wisdom born from necessity. A year passed, then 2, then 5. He saved every penny, living on so little that others worried about him. He ate 1 meal a day. He wore the same 3 shirts, washing them in the sink. He walked everywhere. His bank account grew slowly, painfully, from $200 to $5,000. It took 3 years to save that first $5,000. His brothers spent more than that on single nights out. But to John, it was everything. It was possibility. It was proof he could build something from nothing. He'd graduated from community college and managed to get a job as a junior clerk at Morrison & Associates, a small accounting firm barely staying afloat. The owner, Harold Morrison, was a man in his 60s who'd spent 40 years building a modest practice that had peaked decades ago. John worked harder than anyone Harold had ever hired. He arrived 2 hours before anyone else, studying files, looking for patterns. He stayed late, organizing documents, updating systems. "Why do you work so hard?" he asked him one evening, finding John still at his desk at 9 o'clock. "Because I'm not working for what I get paid. I'm working for what I'm learning." Harold studied him for a long moment. "You're not like the others." "I know. I've been told that my whole life." They meant it as an insult. I mean it as a compliment. 6 months later, Harold called John into his office. "I'm retiring. I'm done. But you've been more loyal to this dying company than my own family. My son didn't want it. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. But you cared when nobody else did." He slid a folder across the desk. "I'm selling the company. $60,000, and it's yours." "I'll take it," John said immediately. It took John 3 months to secure a small business loan, using every penny of his 7 years of savings as a down payment. At 29 years old, John Michael Carter became the owner of Morrison & Associates. He renamed it Carter Solutions, claiming his family name, not because they deserved it, but because he refused to let them keep him from it. The first year was terrifying. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. He was owner, accountant, marketer, janitor, and receptionist. He ate ramen noodles at his desk and slept on the couch more nights than he slept in his tiny apartment. But slowly, painfully, the company began to grow. John's approach was different from anything in the industry. He didn't just offer accounting services. He offered solutions. He worked with struggling businesses, understanding their problems because he'd lived them himself. Word spread. 1 client became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became 100. Within 3 years, Carter Solutions had expanded from 1 office to 3. Within 5 years, they'd
gone regional. Within 7 years, they were national. John's name started appearing in business magazines, but he never gave interviews about his family. When reporters asked about his background, he'd say simply, "I come from nothing, and I built something. That's all that matters." At 36 years old, John Carter was a millionaire. Not from inheritance, not from luck, from work, from sacrifice, from refusing to let rejection define him. Michael and David Carter's mismanagement of Carter Industries had been gradual but inevitable. Michael, for all his charisma, made decisions based on ego rather than strategy. He'd expanded too quickly, taken on too much debt, and alienated longtime clients with his arrogance. David, despite his analytical skills, was paralyzed by perfectionism, delaying decisions for months. Together, they were a disaster. The brothers fought constantly. Every board meeting became a battle. Their parents, now in their 70s, watched helplessly as the empire they'd built crumbled. Richard's health had deteriorated, due heart attacks and advancing dementia. Margaret refused to admit the company was failing, even as creditors began calling daily. The first sign of collapse was when they lost their biggest government contract, a deal worth $20 million annually. 6 months later, 3 of their key clients left. A year after that, Carter Industries was technically insolvent. The bank filed foreclosure notices. Everything had to be sold to cover the debts. The factory buildings, the equipment, the patents, the mansion, the cars, the vacation home. And then the bankruptcy auction was announced. John read about it in the business section of the newspaper. He was sitting in his spacious office at Carter Solutions headquarters when his assistant brought in the morning paper. There it was, in black and white. Carter Industries liquidation auction scheduled. His brothers were losing everything. Everything they'd been promised because they were real Carters. John's first instinct was satisfaction. A dark, bitter part of him whispered, "Good, they deserve it." But as he sat there, that darkness faded into something more complex. Not revenge, not even justice, just possibility. John made a phone call. "Patricia, I need to talk to you about a very large acquisition." The auction was held in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel. Michael and David sat in the back, their faces masks of humiliated rage. Their mother sat between them, her spine straight, her face carefully neutral, but her hands trembling in her lap. The auctioneer began with the smaller assets. Then came the major ones. "We'll now open bidding for the primary manufacturing facility. Opening bid $2 million. Several paddles went up. The price climbed quickly. $6 million, called a voice from the middle of the room. Margaret Carter's head snapped up. She knew that voice, even after 13 years. $8 million, John said calmly. People were starting to turn, trying to see who was bidding. Margaret's eyes widened as she finally saw him, her youngest son, sitting in the middle row, dressed in an impeccable suit. $12 million, John countered another bidder without hesitation. The room went silent. That was above the property's assessed value. Sold to Mr. Carter for $12 million. The auction continued. John bought everything. The patents, the remaining client contracts, the name itself. Carter Industries became his property, even the mansion. He bought it for $3 million. When the auction ended, John had spent $28 million. He'd bought back every significant piece of his family's former empire. As people filed out, John sat quietly, signing paperwork. His mother approached first, moving through the crowd like a ghost. "John," she said, stopping a few feet from his table. "It was you." He looked up at her, this woman who'd told him he was never truly theirs. She looked old now, fragile. "Hello, Mother." "You bought it all? Everything? Why?" "Because I could." Michael and David appeared behind their mother. "So you did this for revenge?" Michael said, his voice sharp with bitterness. "No, Michael, I did this for me. Your humiliation is your own doing." "We lost everything because of you," David snapped. If I just accepted being treated as less than? If I just stayed and watched you inherit what I was never allowed to have?" "You were always ungrateful," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. John laughed, not with humor, but with genuine surprise. "Ungrateful? For what exactly should I have been grateful? You gave me a house. There's a difference. And I was so grateful for that house that I bought it today. I own it now. Every room where I felt like a stranger, it's all mine." He picked up his briefcase and walked past them, but Margaret reached out, grabbing his arm. "John, please, we made mistakes. We can see that now. We lost everything, and now you need me. That's what you're really saying. Now that you have nothing, now that the sons you chose over me have driven your company into bankruptcy, now you remember that I'm your son. Tears began streaming down Margaret's face. "We were wrong. Your father and I, we were so wrong. Please, John, we're homeless. You told me I was never truly yours. So why should it matter to you now that I bought your house?" He pulled his arm free and walked toward the exit. But as he reached the door, he stopped and turned back. "There's a room at the Riverside Inn. It's paid for 1 month. That should give you time to find something permanent." Margaret's eyes widened. "You're helping us?" "I'm giving you a room. That's all. Don't mistake practicality for forgiveness." "But the company," Michael said desperately, "what are you going to do with it?" "Carter Industries is dead. I bought its corpse, so you couldn't, but I have no intention of resurrecting it. I'm going to dismantle it, sell the pieces, and use the assets to expand Carter Solutions. The name will disappear. The legacy you were so proud of will be erased. You can't. I can, and I will. Because that's what happens when you build something on arrogance instead of substance." "Do you hate us that much?" Margaret's voice broke. "No, I don't hate you at all. That's what you'll never understand. I've spent 13 years learning to not hate you. Hate takes energy, and you're not worth that much of my attention anymore."
Then why? Why buy everything? Why show up here? Because you were right about one thing. I was never truly yours. But that didn't make me nothing. It made me free. Free to become something you never imagined I could be. He opened the door. "You said I wasn't a real Carter. You were right. I'm better than that. I'm the Carter who earned his place. I'm the Carter who knows what it means to have nothing. I'm the Carter who won't make the mistake you made." "What mistake?" "Measuring love by bloodlines instead of by heart, giving everything to some and nothing to others, telling a child he doesn't belong and expecting him to stay. That was your mistake, and it cost you everything." And with that, John Michael Carter walked out, leaving behind his mother's quiet sobs and the ruins of a family that had never truly been his. 3 weeks passed before his parents came to see him again. John was in his office when his assistant buzzed. "Mr. Carter, your parents are here. Send them in." Richard and Margaret Carter looked diminished somehow. His father moved slowly with a cane, his face bearing the slack expression of someone whose mind was slipping away. His mother hunched slightly, her designer clothes replaced with something simpler. "John," his father said, and for a moment his eyes cleared. "Is that you, son?" Something in John's chest tightened at that word. "Son." "Yes, father. It's me. Look at this office. You've done well. Better than we ever did, I think." Margaret helped Richard to a chair, then stood awkwardly. "Please," John gestured, "to the other chair. Sit." Silence stretched between them. 13 years of words unsaid. "We shouldn't have come," Margaret finally said. "You made it clear you wanted nothing to do with us. But your father, he's not well. The doctors say it's advancing faster than expected, and he wanted to see you." "What do you want me to say?" "Nothing. We deserve nothing. But John, I need you to understand something. We were wrong. So completely. Irreversibly wrong. When we told you that you weren't truly ours, we destroyed something precious. You destroyed yourselves through your own choices, not because of me. No, you don't understand. We destroyed ourselves the moment we rejected you, because we rejected the best of us. Your brothers were ambitious and clever, but they were also greedy and shallow. You were different. You were thoughtful, careful, humble. You worked for things. You valued what you earned. And you saw that as weakness. We saw it as a threat," Margaret corrected, "to our legacy, to our pride. You didn't fit that image, so we told ourselves you weren't really ours. But we were wrong. Your differences made you better." Suddenly, Richard spoke up, confused. "Where's John?" "I'm here, Dad." His father looked at him, struggling to focus. "I wanted to tell you something important, something about the company, about you and the company." He frowned, frustrated.
Margaret, what did I do wrong? Margaret's face crumpled. You chose wrong, Richard. We both did. We chose the sons who didn't deserve it over the one who did. John walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd conquered through determination. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, not because it changes anything, but because 13 years ago, I promised myself that I would make something of my life, and part of that meant letting go of the poison you put in me. I forgave you years ago, actually. I just never told you. Then why did you buy everything? Because forgiveness doesn't mean I'm weak. It means I'm free. I bought Carter Industries because it was a good business decision. It wasn't personal. It was practical. But the mansion? John smiled slightly. I'm turning it into a youth center. A place for kids who don't fit in anywhere else. Kids who feel like they don't belong in their own families. Every room where I felt alone will become a room where someone else learns they're not. Margaret began crying harder. You're giving it to children? I'm giving it purpose, something it never had when we lived there. And I'm calling it the Morrison Youth Center, after Harold Morrison, who gave me a chance when no one else would. Richard reached out a trembling hand toward John. That's good. You're a better man than I ever was. I know, John said simply, without arrogance, just stating a fact. Margaret stood slowly, walking until she was directly in front of him. I can't undo what we did. I can't give you back your childhood. But John, please know this. If I could go back, I would stand up. I would stop your father. I would say, no, this is wrong. John is ours. John deserves everything. John is valuable exactly as he is. But you didn't, and you can't go back. No, but I can tell you now what I should have told you then. I'm proud of you. You're brilliant and strong and kind, and you became all of those things not because of us, but despite us. John felt something crack inside him, not breaking, but opening. Thank you. I needed to hear that. They left, smaller and older than the powerful people from his memory. 6 months later, the Morrison Youth Center opened its doors. The mansion had been transformed. The grand foyer had now become a welcoming common area. The formal dining room had become a teaching kitchen. The library was now a computer lab. The bedrooms upstairs had been converted into counseling offices, art studios, and music practice rooms. John stood in what used to be his childhood bedroom and felt profound completion. The opening ceremony drew crowds, politicians, business leaders, donors, and most importantly, young people from the community. When John spoke, he looked at young faces that reminded him of his younger self. Welcome to the Morrison Youth Center. This building used to be a home. But for some of us, home isn't always loving. Sometimes the greatest gift we receive is the freedom to leave and become who we're meant to be. Several kids nodded. This center exists for anyone who's ever felt like they don't belong. Anyone told they're not good enough. This is your place now. You don't have to earn acceptance. You just have to show up.
He pulled out his worn notebook. I wrote this on one of my hardest nights. Rejection doesn't kill you. It reveals you. Every door that closes forces you to build your own entrance. Several young people were crying. None of you are here by accident. You're here because someone believed in you. And I promise, what you find here isn't charity. It's opportunity. It's community. It's proof that your past doesn't determine your future. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, his mother approached. You did this. You took everything painful and made it beautiful. Everyone needs to know they matter. I learned that the hard way. We should have shown you that. But I see what you've become, and I understand you became this in spite of us. John squeezed his mother's hand briefly. Go home, Mom. Take care of Dad.
And remember, love isn't something you measure out. Love is infinite, or it's nothing. Years passed. The center thrived. John's brothers reconnected with him, not as competitors, but as men trying to rebuild their relationship. His father passed away peacefully, and at the funeral, the three brothers stood together, not as the divided family they'd been, but as men trying to heal old wounds. 10 years after the center opened, John stood once more in front of the mansion in the rain. But this time, everything was different. The building glowed with warm light. Through the windows, he could see young people engaged in art classes, music lessons, homework help. The house that had been cold was now full of life. If he could speak to 18-year-old John now, walking away with nothing but pain and determination, he would say, "It gets better. The pain will forge you. The rejection will teach you compassion. And someday, you'll take this house of pain and turn it into a home of healing. They were wrong about you, and you'll prove it by becoming the father figure to hundreds of kids that you never had, by loving unconditionally the children you don't even know yet, by building something that matters more than money or status. You're going to be extraordinary. Not because you're special, but because you'll refuse to let their rejection be the end of your story. You'll make it the beginning." John smiled, wiped his eyes, and walked to his car. Tomorrow, the center would open again. More kids would walk through those doors carrying pain and the weight of rejection. And John would be there to tell them the truth their families couldn't say. You matter. You belong. You are loved. Exactly as you are. Because he knew, better than almost anyone, how much those words could change a life. Never reject a child because they seem different. Never measure love in portions, giving more to some and less to others. John's parents gave everything to his brothers and nothing to him because he didn't fit their mold. They destroyed their family, their company, and their legacy. But John transformed his pain into purpose. He bought back everything they lost, not for revenge, but to prove that rejection doesn't define worth. Then he gave it away to children who needed what he once needed, someone to tell them they belong. To every parent, love your children equally, unconditionally, completely, not for what they achieve, but for who they are. Because the child you overlook today might be the one who teaches you tomorrow what truly matters, and by then, it might be too late. To everyone who's been rejected, you are enough. Their failure to see your worth doesn't diminish it. Use your pain to help others. Transform your wounds into wisdom. A heart you push away today might become the hand that saves you tomorrow. Love your children, all of them, while you still can.
If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to Parent Tales for more stories that teach us to love better. Share this video with every parent you know. It might save a family from years of regret. Comment below. Where are you parenting from? What's one lesson you're taking from John's story? Check out our other powerful parenting stories on the channel. Each one carries lessons that could change how you parent and how you love. Another incredible story is coming soon. Until then, go hug your children and tell them they're enough, exactly as they are. Every child is precious. Every child deserves love. Every child is enough. Thank you for being part of the Parent Tales family.